Connecting to cloud server. Hello everybody, sorry for just checking I've got all my eggs in the one basket. This has been slightly nightmarish in terms of planning. Zoom is wonderful, but not always. So I'd like to welcome Liz Norman, who's been my go-to for the past God knows how long, or for however long I've been involved in qualitative research. Liz knows anything and everything to do with this industry. She's actually got more years than I thought, because she's puts 35 years on her profile and 30 years in terms of setting up Elizabeth Norman International. But you've just told me that there's even more.
Yes, well, a long time ago, I worked for IBM looking at whether they should go into the PC market or not. And then I went on to work for a company called Media Audits, which is actually just being sold off by Accenture, doing media analysis. I then got offered a job by AGB, but decided to become a recruitment consultant instead.
So we're delighted to welcome you and Liz, and to have a bit of good news, which is that, yay, this has been put on pause for a year, by which time hopefully we'll be better prepared. But this is the purpose of this particular webinar, so we'd like to take you through it, she said, hopefully. And the slides are not going. Well, this is going to be interesting, doing it without slides.
Okay, right, we've got key changes.
Hang on a minute, let me go back. I'm not quite sure why this suddenly decided not to do it, and we've got key changes again. Okay. This is the title, and this is where we got a year's extension.
So yes, it was supposed to come in on the 6th of April. And then the government announced late last night, as one of the many things that they're going to do to help business during the coronavirus crisis, they're going to delay it. They're not going to cancel it, but they're going to delay it until the 6th of April 2021.
And it's already been implemented in the public sector, is that right? Yes.
So it was implemented in the public sector in 2017. So we do know a little bit about how it will work.
To give you a bit of background, the House of Lords is not convinced by it in the slightest, and was due to hold a question session on Monday evening, where they were going to question 2 tax people. We don't know the result of that or if it happened, but they are very unhappy about it, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, it is going to mean that it is far more difficult for people to work as contractors or freelancers. And with the way that business is going generally, there is a lot of concern that this is not a move in the right direction. Why the government are doing it is because it will increase tax revenue hugely. They're expecting to raise literally billions through it. So that's what it's all about. But at the same time, if it reduces flexibility of workforce, that is not great. So this slide just explains a little bit about how they're going to raise increased tax revenues. The main one is that employers pay 13.8% employment national insurance over and above what they pay you. And obviously, if they're using a contractor, they don't have to pay that. But moving forward, they will have to pay that on contractors. And the second thing is that freelancers often enjoy more tax efficiency through paying themselves dividends. And this is a way of ensuring that they can't do that moving forward.
I think we also discussed whether they would be even more keen to get this going at the end of the year because they really need the money, or whether the industry would change so much that maybe this is our chance to change it.
Yes, I think that's true. And I would say thank everybody for coming along to this webinar. And even though things have been delayed for a year, I think it's important that people know all about it, because this is something that I think the industry has not been aware of and perhaps has not lobbied as much as it could have done. And now we have a chance, we have a year to plan and possibly lobby and try and prevent some of the worst changes.
So let's look at some of the key changes. Could you talk us through them, do you think?
So the first one is that moving forward, it is the employer that will be liable if the correct tax is not paid by the contractor. So in the past, if you decided to fiddle your own tax expenses, then that you could be chased by Inland Revenue and you would be liable. Moving forward, it will be your employer, i.e. your client, that is liable. And by putting the emphasis on them, they are hoping that A, there will be more compliance, but B, the problem is that they may think, well, we won't take on contractors at all. It's too risky.
And too expensive.
And too expensive, yes. So that's the first thing. I know, Luella, we also talked about if you could avoid this legislation by living abroad. And the answer is that because it's the company that is liable, it depends where the company is. It doesn't matter where the contractor is.
So if I'm paid, for example, by a publisher in the States, that's their problem, not mine.
Yeah. So if you're paid by a publisher in the States, it's not a problem because they're an American company. They don't fall under UK legislation. Sorry, I've just tried turning my phone off. I hope I've managed to do it.
The other thing that's been happening is that people have taken advice on this and have become limited companies. So they have a year to determine whether that is worth it.
I don't think becoming a limited company will be worth it. In the past, being a limited company meant that you complied with HMRC legislation and it was fine to be a contractor. Moving forward, it makes no difference. It's the client and the employer that is liable, whether you are limited or not, and whether you are working for lots of companies or not.
So what are the likely impact on rates, do you reckon? Because I know you've been having conversations with people.
Yes, so we have a number of contractors that we have employed at our clients. So we've already started talking to them, obviously bearing in mind that we expect this to come in on April the 6th. And in many cases, it means that what the contractor takes home drops by about 30%, which is huge. And the reason for this is that the employer will in future have to pay 13.8% national insurance, which they will take off the rates. There are other costs. I put payroll admin costs, but there are other costs that they will have to pay on behalf of the contractor. Things like apprenticeship levy, pension, student loan. Yeah. So there, all of those little things that you forget, that will come off the rate. And finally, for a lot of companies, that rather than putting somebody on their payroll and taking off all those costs, they would prefer to put them through a third-party recruitment or umbrella organisation, so somebody like us or an umbrella company. And then, of course, we also charge our admin fee. So all of this comes off the contractor's rate. The other thing to bear in mind is that the contractor's rate may reduce still further because the way that they're paying themselves is PAYE and not through dividends.
So if somebody was going to be doing maternity cover, how would that work?
Well, it's still impossible to take on somebody for maternity cover, but you have to put them on someone's payroll. Now, the company may choose to put them on their own payroll and cover all those costs themselves, paying a reduced rate to the contractor, and probably putting that individual on a 0 hours contract. Or similarly, they may put them through a recruitment agency, but again, that's going to reduce costs.
So there is good news, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So the reason I originally got involved is the recruitment industry has been lobbying very hard against this, because we believe that flexibility of employment is essential to ensure full employment. And one of the things that we managed to secure is an exemption for small companies. Now, companies are small if they have any of the two things on those slides: a turnover of 10.2 billion or less, 5.1 million on its balance sheet, or 50 employees or less. And that means that an awful lot of qual agencies will be exempt when this comes in 2021. But it doesn't help the contractors, of course, unless they are working for small companies. And that means that the shape of the industry may well change.
So qual industry is actually in a better state than quant in this respect.
Yes, absolutely, because most qual agencies are quite small, and they will be able to take on contractors more cheaply, because they don't have to cover these extra costs. And I would think the contractors would be keen to work for them, because they will be take home more. So, you know, what does it mean for the big companies? Will they find that they aren't able to take on contractors at all? And we're of course talking about agencies here. When it comes to the client side, most of the clients will not fall into this bracket. So does it mean that contractors will stop working for the end client and only work for smaller agencies?
Or that a middleman will suddenly pop up to make a killing? Well, sorry.
Yes. I don't know that we expect to make a killing out of it. But yes, that is an option, that they could go to a middleman, yeah. So we've covered most of those, haven't we, I think?
We have, and apologies for the spelling mistake. So these are the criteria. Could you talk us through them, do you think?
Yes. So if you're a large company and you do fall inside IR35, i.e. this legislation applies to you, there are still ways that you could employ a contractor. And really what the government is doing by saying this is we're allowing the end client, i.e. Diageo or Guinness or whoever, to work with small companies. So one of the things that might be a positive is that actually for small companies, they find that clients can work with them, but they're not able to work with contractors. So these three things make sure that you are a genuine small company and you are not a contractor. And as I say, if you are a contractor, you must fulfill them. The first is substitution. So you must show that you have somebody else that can do the job if for some reason you're off sick. The second one is supervision, direction and control. And I've talked in the past about this being a bit like, the easiest way to understand it is think of a plumber. So when you get a plumber or plumbing company in, you don't tell them what to do, you tell them what the problem is, and the plumber decides how to approach that problem. They tell you how long the job is going to take, and usually they do the job while you go off and make them a cup of tea. So that is a genuine small company. They are taking control. They're not just doing something to a set number of hours that you have set them. And the third one is mutuality of obligation. This is hotly debated, and one of the good reasons for delaying is that nobody really knows what it means. But the consensus seems to be that it means taking financial responsibility. So, for example, if we went back to the plumber, if they came and they tried to fix your boiler, but they weren't able to, then you wouldn't expect to pay them, and you would expect them to come back and solve the problem.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're paying somebody by the hour, then you definitely don't fall into this sort of thing, or the day. But if you're paying them for a complete job, and if the job is not completed, you're not necessarily paying them in full, then you do meet that.
So you might actually need to get somebody in as well to help solve the problem. Yeah,
well, one of the things that communities like AQR may well be able to do is allow in some way qualitative researchers to group together and form some sort of cooperative, so that they do meet these criteria, so that they do genuinely meet the criteria of a small company, which they wouldn't do as individual contractors.
Yeah, yeah. So we were talking about online help, and this is one that you've come up with, isn't it?
Well, it's not one I've come up with.
HMRC has.
Yes, HMRC have produced a online, not only it's partly to provide advice, but also all clients or end employers, if they think that the person that they are taking on might be a contractor rather than a small company, they have to go through the checklist on this. And if the checklist shows that it is a small company, it is evidence for the company that they have done the right thing, and helps them avoid being taken to court if the correct tax is not paid. The other thing, actually, just briefly to mention there, is that once the company has decided that you are genuinely a small company and not a contractor, they must confirm that with you.
So we shouldn't ignore the larger organisations, and you've got this advice for them.
Yes, so larger organisations, on the whole, if they can't show that you are genuinely a small company, which is going to be the case for a lot of qualitative contractors, then they have two choices, which is either to put the freelancer on the payroll of a third-party organisation, or to permanently employ that freelancer or that contractor, but on a 0 hours contract.
But the buck still stops with them, doesn't it?
Well, if either way, if they do either of those things, then the rates will be cut, because things like employers' NI will have to be paid. But at least they can use their services, yeah, even though they're using them at a vastly reduced rate.
So can you give us some advice for contractors?
Yeah.
And also amplify what role collectives could play in all this, because clients will obviously organise their own contractors, but, sorry, this is a completely different point, but should contractors at least have their own access to their own contracts that could serve as a guideline?
Well, as I say, one of the ways around it for contractors is to no longer be a contractor, to genuinely be a small company. And so they can form collectives, and if they form collectives, then they will meet those three objectives. So they'll definitely have somebody that can step in and do the work if they can't. They are more likely to be able to sort of, say, take out insurance, so that if they're not getting paid, they are supported and helped, and that sort of thing helps with mutuality. And they also will have a variety of skills that mean they're not just saying, oh, I'll do 6 groups for you, but I can solve this whole problem. You know, the 3 of us can get together and solve this whole problem, and this is what it will cost. So in effect, one of the best ways around it for contractors is to join together and form small companies. These are listed here for contractors who haven't done that. It's what they should do if they want to carry on as a contractor. And probably we don't need to talk about that because that's not going to come in now for another year. Yeah. So they've got time to think about that.
But a year is an ideal time to actually think about collectives.
Yeah, absolutely. A year is great, isn't it? To sort of think how you could do that. And obviously I don't work for AQR, but AQR may want to think about how they can support contractors by helping them to do that. Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of it. I think the only other one I had was a couple of miscellaneous ones, like can you challenge decisions? Can you insure against a wrong one? And can you institute a contract review?
Challenge decisions, yes, decisions can be challenged, but ultimately it is up to the company to challenge with HMRC, not the individual. And I think that as an independent contractor, the chances of you managing to get Tesco's to challenge the decision on your behalf are slim, but they can be challenged by Tesco's if they so choose to do so.
I'm sorry, I only just put the chat window up. We've got a little question from Judy saying, will all businesses have to pay this extra 13.8% or only businesses with turnover of 10 million plus? So, I think you've answered it, but
yes, the small companies absolutely can carry on employing contractors in just the way that they have been in the past. And in fact, I'm expecting it to be easier for them to employ contractors because contractors are going to want to work for them and not big companies.
If there are no more Q&As out there, we will disappear. I think there might be. Hang on, let me just see. Can you clarify what's changing in terms of dividends? We won't be able to get them, will you?
No, because you're not a limited company anymore. You're an employee of either the third party or an employee of the end client on a 0 hours contract. So you won't be able to pay yourself dividends. That said, if your client is a small company, you can carry on operating in exactly the same way as you did before, and you can pay yourself dividends. So, you know, you can see why we're expecting all contractors to say, I wouldn't dream of working for the end client or the, you know, the big company. I want to work for you, the small qualitative agency.
We've got another question from Naomi Day, who says, I'm confused about whether this applies to sole trader freelancers or not.
The government doesn't define, it doesn't break it down. It's basically anybody, whether they're a sole trader, a freelancer, a contractor, a limited company, if they are an individual working for an end client, this legislation applies. The only thing that makes a difference is whether your end client is big or small.
Well, I think we've got one thank you from Alan. Thank you, Alan. No more questions as yet. There were a load more questions when the ICG did its webinar, so I'm not sure whether we've just answered them all or not. But, oh, thank you for another thank you. But in the case that we haven't answered all the questions. What do you suggest? Should they people
Yes,
send
they're
their
welcome
emails?
to contact me. I've got my office number on there. Needless to say, as you can probably see, I'm working from home. So I would suggest the best thing actually is to email me, and I can pick it up from there. If you want me to speak to you, then just include your mobile number and I can ring you back.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Liz. It was tremendously helpful and worth all the hair pulling that we had beforehand, which nobody knows what went on. But believe me, there was a lot of hair pulling. And we only came up with a solution just before we went on air. Rest assured that AQR is busy looking at how it can support its members through this time. And they've got some really good ideas. But if you have any, please email in to Rose, and I'm sure she'll be very pleased to get them. And stay safe. I think that's probably the one thing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Oh.